In the middle of the 1600s, armies loyal to King Charles I and armies loyal to Parliament faced off in 3 civil wars. The supporters of the parliamentarians, often known as Roundheads, fought the royalist supporters, often known as Cavaliers, over long-standing disputes about religious freedom and how the 3 kingdoms of England, Scotland and Ireland should be governed. I want to tell you about Dry Drayton at this time. Did Dry Drayton play a part in the Civil War? Of course it didn't, but like so many communities, the wars touched the village. People will know that Oliver Cromwell was a significant figure in this period. He replaced the king and took the title Lord Protector. But what of his origins? He was born in Huntingdon in 1599. And whilst Cromwell's later life as a military and political leader is well documented, for the first 40 years Cromwell remained relatively obscure. He was educated at Huntingdon Grammar School and later at Sidney Sussex College in Cambridge. When his father died, he returned home to support his mother and 7 unmarried sisters, later moving to St Ives and to Ely, and in 1640 he was elected MP for Cambridge. Most surely, in this early part of his life, Cromwell would have travelled along the Godmanchester to Cambridge Road, the current A14. This route is much busier today. The Dry Drayton parish boundary runs down the middle of this ancient route, so at least on the outward journeys towards Huntingdon and St Ives, we can claim that Oliver Cromwell was in our parish many times. Of course, we have to admit Cromwell was most likely unaware and unconcerned that he was technically in Dry Drayton, or that the consequences of his rise to power and influence would ripple far and wide, and even along his route home past our village.
During the whole period of the Civil War, we find Edward Onge as rector in Dry Drayton. About this time there were only about 50 dwellings in the village, with the rectory in Parson's Grove near the manor house in the park. Initially the church was said to be in apple pie order, the windows well glazed, the roof substantial, the walls clean and the floor paved and without rubbish. However, according to the articles of inquiry in the Restoration, in this troublous period of the Civil Wars, the village did not escape unscathed. In the church, the altar steps and rails were demolished, and attacks were sustained to brass and sculpture, done in fact by an unknown company of runagate soldiers. These runagate or renegade soldiers, however, were unlikely to have been sent by Cromwell's means, as Dry Drayton was within parliamentarian lands. Perhaps they were Puritans. Even the Reverend Onge himself suffered during these troublous times. It's recorded that his persistent preaching led to insults by farm labourers. The church wardens admitted some lack of zeal in the celebrations of holy days, and also the unbefitting conduct at one wedding, when there was a pulling of ribbons or such like things for the bride and bridegroom. They hoped for better behaviour in future. The struggles of the church during these late and unhappy times of disorder and confusion must have bewildered the peasant community of this, shall we say, relative backwater of Dry Drayton.
All this was happening when far away in India, the Taj Mahal was under construction. There was the first recorded European sighting of New Zealand. And Cape Town was founded in southern Africa. This was when England had a population of about 5 million and the world of about 600 million. High infant mortality in this era meant that life expectancy was just 30 to 40 years of age.
So we believe that Oliver Cromwell probably unwittingly passed through the edge of our parish. What of the opposing protagonist in the Civil War, King Charles I?
Charles was born in 1600, just a year after Oliver Cromwell, but far away in Scotland. He was the second son of James I, but after his elder brother died, Charles became heir apparent and eventually King of England, Scotland and Ireland. However, Charles quarrelled with the English Parliament, which sought to curb his royal powers. He believed in the divine right of kings and was determined to govern according to his own conscience. After several years of fighting, the Roundheads took King Charles prisoner during early June 1647. He was brought under escort to Childerley Hall, where he remained a virtual prisoner for several days. So we have a very tenuous connection here with the king. One wonders if he, like his nemesis in the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell, knew or even cared that he was so close to our parish. Did he perhaps glance up at the hedgerows that form the boundary with our village, thinking of his subjects toiling away in the fields of Dry Drayton? Very unlikely, but we can imagine. The painted chamber in Childerley Hall, in which he was confined, has been carefully preserved. The day after Charles left Childerley, June the 8th, 1647, and whilst he was on his way to be handed to the Parliamentary Army near Newmarket, Parliament in London banned Christmas, Easter and Whitsun festivities. All services and celebrations, including in the home, were liable to fines for non-compliance. I think it goes without saying that this law proved to be very unpopular.
Further important changes in law were made a few years later. Marriages to be entrusted to the justices, and a new secular official, the parish register, was to be elected by all the ratepayers of the parish. The records for Dry Drayton contain a memorandum for the appointment of James Gifford as parish register, and we see in these records that several well-known village names constantly recur, especially that of Gifford. This was a time of general educational expansion, and Dry Drayton was one of the group of villages where schooling became available. In the Diocese of Ely records for Dry Drayton, we see individual schoolmasters licensed to teach grammar, reading, writing and accounts. However, for many of the parishioners this was a wretched time. Agricultural prices began to rise, and this would have given strong incentives to sell produce to the nearby expanding urban population of Cambridge, rather than to use it at home. With less food retained in the village, living standards must have declined. In contrast to the conditions in places like Dry Drayton, the first report of coffee being consumed in England was in 1637. An Oxford University academic named John Evelyn wrote that a Greek visitor to the university was the first person he ever saw drink coffee.
King Charles's stubborn refusal to compromise over power sharing had led to several years of fighting between Charles's Cavaliers and Oliver Cromwell's Roundheads. The Civil War, or wars, eventually came to an end, having claimed the lives of thousands and ultimately of the king himself. Charles was convicted of treason and executed on the 30th of January 1649 outside the banqueting house in Whitehall.
Cromwell died a few years later in 1658 and was briefly succeeded as protector by his son Richard. However, there was a gradual disintegration of the Republic, and negotiations began with King Charles I's son for a return of the monarchy. The triumphant King Charles II arrived in London in May 1660, beginning the English Restoration. Back in Dry Drayton, Edward Angers was still the rector. He was now regarded as a model priest, not known to be a common frequenter of drinking houses or gaming places. He rebuilt and extended the rectory, which was still in Parsons Grove, west of the manor house. The village, having come through the troublous times, would continue to be a relative backwater and return to peace and quiet. The Reverend Angers lived for a few more years, but the Ely Episcopal record shows that he died in 1665. He was buried in the churchyard on the 3rd of September of that year.
And so ends our story.